Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Chatting with the Lightkeeper. I am Edward, otherwise known as the Lightkeeper. I guess that intro has kind of become standard. But first of all, let me wish everyone out there a happy Halloween because this episode will be going live, even though it's pre recorded, it'll be going live on Halloween. So I wish everyone out there a happy Halloween. And I hope that if you have kids and went out trick or treating, that they've received lots of their favorites. And if you're a grown up, you are having a fantastic holiday season, celebrating however it is you wish to celebrate. So happy Halloween. And let's get into today's podcast a bit. Um, Typically, I talk about things that are perhaps like BDSM, I guess you could say, for the undergraduate. Today, we're going to change that around, and it's sort of going to become more of a master's level class, if you will. And also, I do want to start with a disclaimer or trigger warning, if you will. The podcast today is going to talk about consensual, non consensual play. And for some people, this activity can be a trigger because of their past experience. What CNC, consent, non consent, um, are things that are done, of course, with the consent of the submissive, but it's where the submissive during that scene, if you will, is role playing that they are not consenting, and the dominant is role playing that they are ignoring the submissive's no. It's one of those activities where the old joke about BDSM really comes into play. And that joke is BDSM is where no means yes and pineapple means stop. And CNC is all about that consent beforehand and the pineapple meaning stop. But during the actual play, for example, if a submissive says no, stop, please don't do this to me. No, those are all disregarded by the dominant. It comes down to safe words or safe gestures. So this is where it can be something that can be uncomfortable, a trigger, or something that perhaps is just something that you don't want to listen to or hear about. And if that's the case, I would invite you to scroll down through my podcast, find an episode that you haven't yet listened to, and give that a try. And then next week, pick up where we left off and skip over this episode. So, CNC play in BDSM, there's three common areas. There you can do it many different ways, but there are three areas where I guess you could say it's most popular. First are kidnapping slash abduction scenes, where the submissive is, if you will, fake kidnapped by their dominant or their trusted play partner, and then as the victim of the kidnap, they are forced to do whatever the kidnapper wishes of them. Breath play can often fall into this. That is where airways are constricted, breathing is constricted, and also there is forced sex as a part of that. A lot of people will refer to it as rape play. I, because we're doing something that's consensual, um, I don't like to say rape play. I like to keep, it's a personal preference of mine. Doesn't have to be yours, but I like to keep rape reserved for, honest to goodness sexual assault. So those are three of the main categories that go along with this. And it can be very hard to understand um, how these can be considered play, but they can be. Um, and it's hard because we put the cringe inducing, if you will, non consent in there. I mean, anytime you hear non consent in this lifestyle, I know for me, it makes me cringe to hear consent, non consent. Just that non consent part is just, it makes you cringe because whenever you think of something not consensual, you think it's abusive, somebody's being assaulted. somebody being raped. I mean, all these horrible things come to mind with non-consent. But it's so important that word before that, consent, meaning the people involved in the scene have all consented to this. So CNC play is probably the roughest, dirtiest, and what people in the vanilla world would probably say are some of BDSM's most depraved. Because imagine if you are vanilla and we're starting to talk about, forced sex. That's going to be something that's going to make a vanilla person want to scream, maybe call the police. So it's a very, very touchy subject. So first of all, it's very important that if you're going to explore any of these kinks under CNC, anything that goes on in consent, non-consent, that it's carefully organized. Uh, Everyone understands what's going to happen. The communication is open, it is direct, and it is explicit. It requires absolute honesty and trust with your partner or partners if you're going to explore this. This is something that if you are new to the lifestyle, I would highly, highly recommend putting any fantasies that you might have in this genre on hold until you really feel comfortable and confident with yourself in the lifestyle and with the partner you're going to choose or partners you're going to choose to explore this with. It does take more of an advanced understanding to engage in this than something that somebody who is newer to the lifestyle would typically have. Um, and it's very important that we have consent nailed down before engaging in CNC play. It's very, very important that consent is explicit, it is understood, it's enthusiastic, it's revocable, and everyone understands the safe words that will revoke consent and also the gestures because sometimes during CNC play, the submissive may not be able to speak. So those gestures are very, very important, and everyone has to understand them. And you have to be with partners that are going to respect them. Now, once again, this is not for everyone. Not everyone involved in the lifestyle has fantasies, nor do they want to explore CNC play. But some people do. And there's a couple of things that are interesting about it. There's a theory out there called sexual blame avoidance. Now, I know that sounds like something out of a psychology book, and it probably is. But what this theory suggests is that since the sex or the activity, but most of all these plays do actually involve sex, is being forced upon the submissive is able to enjoy these, what the vanilla world would say are forbidden fantasies, without feeling guilty, anxious, or regretful afterwards, even though they were part of the submissive's fantasies often, and the submissive was a willing participant in all of this. They are able to do so without feeling guilty or without any anxiousness after or regret, because somebody else in the vanilla, to use a vanilla world, committed this atrocity upon them. Even though the submissive was the willing participant, that's where the blame avoidance comes in. Also, and this is a bit more of a serious thing. Many people who want to explore CNC do so because it helps them work through past sexual abuse. It's a controlled environment, it's a safer environment, or in fact, with trusted partners, it's a safe environment to confront the demons that are left. And in a way, the CNC play allows them to find a level of normalcy. It's a coping mechanism for victims, um, and can help them see sex and intimacy differently, from having a potentially negative view. Now, I do need to add that CNC play is never an alternative or a way to um, handle past sexual abuse um, in place of getting help from experts. This should never, ever be something that gets engaged in um, because a person does not want to get help from an expert. So please do understand that part of it. So let's dig into the little bits of the nuts and bolts of CNC play. First of all, let's talk about negotiations and clarity. Everything needs to be negotiated clearly, absolutely clearly, right down to what is and what isn't going to happen, where limits are, where they aren't. And it's very important to kind of the first time you engage in this with a partner, err on the side of caution. Even if you think that, you know, the old analogy of let's do A, B, and C with this. Perhaps since this is starting with, do A, um, kind of delve a little bit into B, and then at that point end the C even though or end the scene even though C moving in, deeper into B and moving on to C is very enticing and sounds very appealing. It's better to not go too far than going too far because if you go too far, the genie is out of the bottle. So it's better to baby step into this realm than it is to just dive right into the deep end of the pool. So let's talk a little bit about the logistics and safety um, that goes into a non-consenting scene. Um, it's fun to think of non-consent scenes as being spontaneous. Life, unfortunately, doesn't work that way. Spontaneity with this often is something that isn't able to be there. Sometimes these types of scenes actually have to be scheduled. Um, And of course, safe words, safe gestures have to be forefront with it. And there are ways that you can, within play, um, allow or signal your partner that you want more or less of something. For example, I'll use the example of that with breath play and a past submissive. She would often like my hand on her throat when we were having sex. Now, my hand on her throat was never something that was done with a where I was closing or restricting either blood flow or her airway. It was just the mental, if you will, the mental threat that I had the power to do that. But now at the same time, she did love breath play. And she would signal me if she actually wanted me to tighten my grip, if she fought. And that seems counterintuitive. If I put my hand on her neck and she began fighting me to remove my hand, that was the signal that she was giving me that, yes, right now, breath play is what I want. And so it seems, it may seem counterintuitive to you if you've never experienced it, that fighting back would be the signal for yes. But that's how it worked in our relationship. And it is something that we talked about prior to even hand on throat. It was all discussed beforehand. There was no, yes, there was a surprise the first time she did it because it was unexpected for me. I was not expecting her to want that. But it's something like if you are going to engage in that, you need to be aware of it and understand completely when your partner wants it and when they don't, and exactly what the signals are that say yes, that have to be absolutely clear. There can be no bit of muddiness in that at all. And if it's not clear, not 100% clear, don't do it. And you always need to be aware of your partner whenever you're doing anything CNC wise. Really, if you're the person performing these acts, you have to always be aware of how they are reacting, what they are doing, and always make sure that if you are doing something like breath play, that you understand, the 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 whole safety side of it. They need to understand the safety side of it, but you have to have the extra skills so if something does go wrong, for example, rescue breathing. The other thing is communicating. Like I said, the with the relationship I was the breath play. The signal was that she would fight and try and remove my hand, and that was the signal to engage in the non-consensual breath play side of it. Now, how did we get to actually more, for lack of better words, hardcore bits of CNC? How did I know that she was wanting more along those lines? And it all started with James Bond, of all things. If you don't know, here's a little thing about me. I love Bond movies. Absolutely love them. I know they're cheesy. I know they're predictable. And my favorite Bond film is Goldfinger, which is from the 1960s. It is the one, I believe, where they introduced the Aston Martin for the first time, the DB6, to the Bond films. And the funny thing about Goldfinger and the Aston Martin is there's a scene where James Bond is going down an alley which is too narrow for his car, so he is able to get it up so that two wheels are on the wall of the alley and the other two wheels are on the ground. And he enters the alley, I believe, with the right hand side of the car down on the ground. But in the film, when he comes out the other end, it's the car is flipped. The left-hand wheels are actually on the ground. So somehow that, it's a little oops that they didn't cut it out of the film. But unless somebody tells you or points it out to you, you don't see it. Anyways, in Goldfinger, um, it also happens to have my favorite Bond girl. And the character's name is Pussy Galore, who is played by Honor Blackman. And there's a scene where they are in a horse barn, and Pussy Galore is, I don't know, a henchwoman for the villain Goldfinger, and she is tasked with, keeping Bond under control. And so they are in this horse barn, and they start fighting. Um, and James Bond knocks her down. She knocks James Bond down. And suddenly they're fighting in the hay. And all of a sudden, Bond is trying to kiss her and she is trying to fight Bond off. And as happens in most movies like that, James is not asking for Miss Galore's consent to kiss her. He is just trying to take the kiss from her. And she is fighting him for it, which in today's society is actually kind of icky and gross because there is no consent. But back then, sadly, that was how things worked, which is part of, in my opinion, the problem with society. But this is not the podcast for that. But so Miss Glore is fighting James Bond's amorous advances, and of course she cannot resist Mr. Bond. And they start making out, and pretty soon they're having a good old fashioned roll in the hay. Now, watching that film with that submissive, after the movie was over, that opened the door for us to actually discuss, not discussed, to discuss CNC play because she had fantasies along the lines of being made to do things that she doesn't want to do, but wanting to do them, but being made to do them. And I know that probably sounds confusing as heck. But the whole premise behind it with her fantasy, or fantasies, I should say, is that as her dominant, I, of course, want to do these depraved acts to her, which she actually enjoys, but she wants to be made to do them and wants to fight me um, and not allow me to do them. But once I overpower her, then she is willingly going to do the act because she actually wants to do the act. Sounds confusing. For us, it was very erotic, very hot. But the hard part that we had was, well, how do we communicate that so that the play can be, can have a level of spontaneity, not, hey, Saturday night, let's do this role play. So she would know it was coming, I would know it was coming, and for her that kind of ruined the moment, if you will. So what we came up with, she was of Irish descent, and she had this shamrock pin. And that shamrock pin, when she would wear it, it was a signal to me that he was consenting to our CNC play. So that pin on her shirt or, on a hat or wherever she wore it, it was a signal for me that I could, if I chose, engage in CNC play, that she was in the mood and on board for it. And so that pin was the cue, and it didn't mean it was going to happen that time or every time she brought the pin out. In fact, the wearing of the pin in a way heightened the tension because she knew it was possible. I knew at that point it was possible because she is wearing the pin. And so it allowed for mind games between us to happen, which actually increased the intensity of the play when it did happen. Because it wasn't something that happened. I made sure it didn't happen every time she wore the pin. And in fact, I would try and work it in. So if I saw that she was wearing the pin and it was Saturday morning and we were out at brunch and she had the pin on, um, I would, like, oh, if I wanted to engage in CNC play that night, um, one of the mind games I played one time was like, oh, hey, I forgot to tell you that is it okay? I've made plans with, friends of ours to meet them for dinner. So she would have an anticipation that something else was going to happen for the evening. So thus the CNC play when it did happen would come as a surprise. But there are ways like a pin or wearing a specific dress. Or perhaps even a certain colored short shirt. There are various ways that submissives can let their dominant partner know that they are open to their pre-negotiated, pre-consented CNC play that they have or that they enjoy, without actually saying, "Hey, tonight let's do it," and some do this or do that. Sometimes, though, you do have to schedule it. Life's not fair like that. Sometimes it has to be scheduled. Sometimes everybody has to know it's coming because life dictates that. So it's important to think of creative ways to let your partner know that they are that you are on board for CNC play, and something like that where the submissive says, "Hey, I'm on board for it today, tonight." Um, it doesn't mean that that it has to happen, or in a case like the Shamrock pin, there were times where, for example, she would have the pin on, in the morning and afternoon, and then come evening, I would notice that she'd taken the pin off, which with the pin coming off, it's saying, okay, even if I was planning on something that night now, um, consent has been revoked. The pin has gone away. So it was a great signal, if you will, that was very vanilla. I mean, you could wear it any time, even if it was, half the year removed from St. Patrick's Day. She would just, somebody commented on the pin, yeah, I'm of Irish descent, and just felt like wearing the shamrock today. So it worked well for us, but it's something to consider as a way to potentially replace scheduling, but sometimes it does need to be scheduled. Now, let's talk about another aspect to consider when you are planning your CNC play. Um, you have to understand that this play is something that is probably going to be noisy. It's probably going to cause a ruckus. And if that's the case, you're going to want to be conscious of where you do it and your surroundings. For example, if you are going to engage in CNC play, you want to make sure that for example, if it's summertime and you have your windows open, close the windows before you do it because your neighbors are probably going to hear it, and you don't want to meet every law enforcement officer in your fine community. That will happen because your neighbors are going to call the police because a uh, a crime is going to happen. Um, it's very important. For example, there's a couple in my local community that enjoy CNC play, and she, the submissive, has always still has, and they role play it all the time, has kidnapping fantasies that they role play. And for one time, and I believe it was around Halloween, uh, the dominant found um, a costume. It might have been just after. I think it was just after Halloween because he found it like on clearance somewhere. Adult gorilla costume that he was having. A member of the Munch group who was a talented seamstress add a zipper so that he could, or not a zipper, but add buttons and a slot basically adding a button fly to the costume so that his gentleman sausage area could be easily accessible without having to remove the gorilla costume, thus adding to the supposed anonymity of who was the kidnapper during their playtime. But something like that, you're obviously going to want to make sure your neighbors are not going to hear, and that you have the blinds and shades drawn, so your neighbor pulling into their driveway doesn't see a man in a gorilla costume with the, say, hard gentleman sausage hanging out, chasing a screaming, seemingly petrified um, neighbor lady around their home. That would definitely result in a police response. So you want to be very conscious about noise, visibility, all those things when you are going to engage in CNC play. I know it's little things, but it's very easy to leave a window open and have the sounds floating out into the neighborhood. And if you are going to do something where, for example, like a kidnapping scene, where there may be a tackling, taking down, holding down, pinning down part of the scene, make sure to prep an area for a soft landing, and also in that area, make sure there are no sharp edges. Um, so you want to make sure that you have covered the little safety bases as well as the big ones of safe words and safe gestures. And if you're also going to do this, getting back to safe words and safe gestures, practice them, and practice them before you actually engage in play. A popular way that in the past that I have worked with a submissive to practice safe word use and safe gesture use is through the erotic art of edging my partner so that they are on the very verge of orgasm, that they are begging for orgasm, and rather than allowing them to orgasm or doing what I need to do to push them over the edge to give them that orgasm, instead at that point, I ask them to say their safe word or to use their safe gesture. I find that having them say their safe word when they're in this heightened state helps me as a dominant immensely, because sometimes communicating when we are very enthused, when we are very close to an orgasm, we may not um, speak clearly, and so it's very important that they are in the state, they are saying their safe word. It helps me recognize that what kind of sort of sounded like a safe word was their actual safe word. So if I hear something like that in the future, I know, oh, that's safe word. That's pineapple. Okay, got it. So it helps me understand that. It also helps the submissive um, learn to say their safe word when they are in a situation like that, or use their safe gesture and recognize that safe gesture. And of course, when that happens, I stop, praise the submissive for doing what they're doing so that they can learn that using their safe word or safe gesture is not going to result in disappointment from me, or that I am anything less than pleased with them for using it, because the number one reason submissives don't safe word or safe gesture is because they fear disappointing their dominant. And that should never be the case. Your dominant should always be happy that you safe worded, because whatever the reason, it should be a I'm glad you did that moment rather than I'm so disappointed that you safe worded when we were so. If you ever run into a dominant that is disappointed that you safe worded, it's time to reassess that individual. Just saying. So practice safe words and safe gestures. And just for the record, yes, after stopping praising, my submissive definitely was allowed to continue and to have that amazing orgasm. But it wasn't. It was something that I still recommend everyone do, is practice, practice, practice with those safe words and gestures, because we all suck the first time we do something for the first time. So practice those safe words and safe gestures so that everyone is comfortable with them, understands them, and understands that it's a safe environment to use them. Another thing about CNC, um, so much of the fantasy revolves around, it being unscripted. But think of CNC play, rather than unscripted, think of it more as reality TV. Uh, it's unscripted to a point, but there is a playbook or a script there. It doesn't have to be um, set lines where, after dominant says, I'm going to do this, and the submissive replies with that. It doesn't have to be like that tight of a script, but have a playbook, have a plan. That way, especially when you're newer, you walk through that playbook or that loose script of what is going to happen, so that everyone is understands what happens, what isn't going to happen. And when you do engage in CNC play, stick with your playbook. Don't put something else in that's new. You stay within what you've discussed. You don't change from that. You may deviate in, the script may go A, B, and C, but when it comes playtime, it may go BCA, something like that. So, but have a agreed upon, consented to playbook or script before it happens. So, also during CNC play, something to expect is unexpected emotions. Um, Sometimes, even though everything is consented to and you've talked through that playbook, CNC play may trigger unexpected emotions. The first time with the submissive, when we were doing the James Bond, um, at one point, uh, I was like, "Oh my God, she's crying." So of course, I dropped the I am James Bond. I am going to do what I want with you. And like, are you okay? And understand during CNC play, it is perfectly acceptable to break character, to break role, and check in on your partner. And in this case, are you okay was greeted with a smile and an emphatic head nod. Yeah. Um, it's like, okay, I just needed to check you're crying, and smile and head nod again. I'm good. But expect unexpected emotions to happen. And understand that it's okay to break out of your acting role, if you will, and check in on your submissive, or your dominant even, because this is an intense emotional experience. So it's okay to ask, even if you think everything is going fine and there are no unexpected emotions popping up or unexpected things. to ask. In fact, I would encourage it. Another thing to talk about before you engage in CNC play is to talk about trigger words. And it's very important because some words have powers that go beyond words. And during play, we may use words that we may not normally use when talking to our dominant or submissive. So it's very important to understand if a partner has words. They may want to role play, in this case, the James Bond thing, but for some reason, Goldfinger is a trigger word. So we're not going to, even though we might be role playing the movie, we can't say the word Goldfinger. But whatever it is, find out if there are words, and this is especially true if somebody involved has been the victim of sexual violence. There may be a word that their attacker said that when they hear that word, it triggers them to always think of that moment. And so you may talk about that and make it a priority to not use um, one of those trigger words. Another thing to do, and once again, it takes away from the spontaneity, but do a walkthrough. Do a dress rehearsal, if you will, where you're in roles, but then you break out of the role and you talk about what you've just done or what you're about to do, and is it okay, and how did that feel? Baby step into it. Do dress rehearsals. And it doesn't have to be the whole scene. You could just combine a little bit of the dress rehearsal with a standard romantic interlude, if you will. Um, so it's fine to do that. Or if you're having a romantic interlude, ask your partner, hey, can we practice a little bit about what we talked about? Um, can we practice doing a bit of the James Bond fantasy? And in my case, there was something that she wanted to have it be a part of it that I was very uncomfortable with. Uh, and one of discussing the fantasy, one of the things that she shared is uh, when I was going to force myself, um, force my gentleman sausage into her mouth, one of the things she wanted me to do was to slap her face with my hard cock. And I apologize. I normally don't do explicit things on this podcast, but I don't know any other way to say it. I was uncomfortable with that. So we were having I guess you could call it a standard roll in the hay. And I said, can we practice doing this? Because and it was something that I was upfront with. Can we practice doing that? Like now, since we're kind of in that pose. And we did, which helped me become comfortable doing that um, to her. So it sounds kind of crazy to practice, but it definitely helped both of us. So you can incorporate little bits and practice some of the things that anybody involved might be uncomfortable with before it happens. And finally, since we talked earlier about, if you leave a window cracked or don't have the blinds closed, that a neighbor could see or a well-meaning passerby could see and misinterpret what is going on from a consensual fantasy bringing to life into somebody actually thinking they are seeing something criminal happening. So it's very important to understand your local laws. Um, I believe currently it's 16 states in the United States. Anal sex is allowed or is not allowed. Um, you know, Heaven forbid you engage in a sexual act that isn't designed to create another human being. But that's neither here nor there. But so if you have your blinds cracked and somebody sees you doing the dance with no pants in the back door, yeah, you could go to jail. Um, Another thing, so many people, it's a fantasy many people have of doing kind of CNC place, consent, non-consent play in semi-public places. Well, let's face it, public sex, public nudity is illegal in most places. Um, so it's very important that perhaps you consider that into your role play. Maybe turn your bedroom into a fake beach. Put a kiddie pool and some beach towels on the ground. I and plastic underneath so if water gets out of the kiddie pool. Uh, it's very important that you understand the legal ramifications if you're going to do, if the public sex, public nudity thing is a part of it. Um, Another thing that goes kind of hand in hand with that is um, sometimes there's a component of having somebody catch the CNC, catch you in the act doing CNC or watch. Um, Once again, if you're going to go down that road, have the watcher or the person who catches you in the act be a trusted lifestyle friendly or lifestyle involved person rather than your nosy neighbor. Don't put yourself in any kind of risk um, indulging these fantasies. Now, we've kind of gotten through the whole fantasy and some of the things to consider and to go into. The next thing we need to talk about is the aftercare. Because aftercare with CNC is so incredibly important. It is, in my opinion, it's non-negotiable whenever you do CNC play. Aftercare has to be there. But aftercare is going to be different because what has happened is so much more intense. There's another level of intensity with CNC play than exists with traditional BDSM play or scenes. Expect to have subdrop. If you are submissive, expect to have that moment when all those wonderful endorphins that make us feel good during play go away. Expect that to happen. Expect it to be more intense than what you've experienced in the past. And because CNC play often involves the submissive being forced, even though they've consented to it beforehand. The dominant is forcing the submissive to do things, whether it's, putting them in the trunk of a car or pinning them down and tying them up and making them their kidnap victim. They are being forced to do things. Even though they've consensually said they want to do them, there's that part of it has happened. There are times and there are submissives who, when it's all said and done, may need time away from their dominant. They may need a break. They may need to have that time to process what has happened. And even though the scene is over and the dominant is back to being the loving dominant, the loving boyfriend that, is back in that mode, the submissive is may still be struggling to see them not as their loving dominant partner, but they may still see them mentally as here's this person that just forced themselves inside me. Even though it was all done consensually, there may need to be the submissive may need a break from seeing their dominant right then. After the scene is over, they may need some space. Tears are very, very common. Um, Sometimes submissives will be hostile towards their dominant right after a scene as they're going through the process of unpacking what has just happened. Um, and sometimes a submissive may seem bratty to some dominants because they're kind of needing to reassert um, their their agency. And so whatever your submissive is showing as they're coming out of the scene, um, the dominant needs to do whatever it needs to do to help their submissive regain their balance. Um, don't be offended by how a submissive is coming out the other side after a CNC scene. So it's very important to expect the unexpected when it comes to aftercare. And to expect these things, even if everything goes to plan, the script was great, no one missed their lines, everything went just according to plan. How things are processed, especially the first time you do something like this, expect the unexpected. Don't take them personally. If your submissive needs some quiet time, allow them the quiet time. If they need a little bit of alone time, allow them the alone time. If they are sobbing, let them sob. If they're sobbing and they don't want you to hug them while they're sobbing, allow that. Whatever it is, allow them to have what they need to regroup after it's done. And know you're submissive. For example, if cuddling and, for example, chocolate are go-to things for their aftercare, make sure that once they're ready, that they have all the cuddles they could ever want, and don't just have any sort of chocolate. Go out there. I mean, you've just completed an intense CNC scene. Have that expensive chocolate that they love, and have a huge spread of it, and let them know that, you know, they can have as much as they want. So whatever it is that they really enjoy, incorporate that into your aftercare. Um, you need to tailor it to your submissive whilst you're still expecting a possible unexpected um, result. Um, for me, one of the things that worked with the after the James Bond scenes, would be quiet time, some cuddling, a little bit of conversation, and then normally, um, for whatever reason, normally this would happen early enough in the evening, that my submissive's favorite restaurant, which was well, yeah, was. Unfortunately, it is no longer. Um, was a formal restaurant. It meant dressing up and dressing well. Um, that was their favorite restaurant, and that was always part of the aftercare plan. It was part of the aftercare plan would be me, if I saw the pin and I realized that we were going to do this, that I was going to lead us to this type of play that evening, um, I would have a formal outfit ready for them to wear so that, after the cuddling and after the communication and the intimate aftercare part was over, we got dressed and we went out to a nice dinner. And one of the things that we talked about in the debrief, because you still debrief after these scenes, is the incorporation of the formal dinner and going out and having, as she put it, normal people, conversing like normal people in public, help her back to reality, kind of helped her get back into a normal mindset after the CNC play. So that act of going out to a formal dinner really helped restore her balance. So whatever that is, and you can try different things. And don't expect the first thing you do to be amazing. Um, like I said, debriefing is key. So when it's all said and done, um, you need to have a conversation with your submissive, and it perhaps that night might be not the right time, or the next day might not be the right time. It all depends on the people involved, but when it's the right time, talk it through. Talk about what worked. Talk about what didn't work. Talked about what they liked, what they didn't like. Would they like to do it again? And if they say no, that's great. If they say yes, then you can start to kind of start scripting together. You can start scripting that next scene. Um, when I had that first debrief, and we were talking about the whole James Bond scene, I was actually flabbergasted and shocked because when I asked my submissive, you know, if she would want to do this again, and she says, "Absolutely, I can't wait." And I said, "Great." I wasn't expecting that. And then I said, "Well, is there something that you would like to do differently?" And she said, "Yeah, you need to be rougher." And that flabbergasted me because me being me, I'm like, wow, I thought I was a pretty mean, demanding person, but wow, okay. Which oddly excited me. I'm not going to lie, it did. Um, and I think there's a prime example of the unexpected. I would never have expected before this that that comment would have turned me on, but it did. So it was a learning experience for me. So it's very important to have that debrief when the time is right and to talk things through what worked, what didn't work, just like you do with a traditional scene, so that next time can be even better. Also, when it comes to aftercare, let's flip the page because something like this, dominance may need aftercare as well. In my case, I needed reassurance. I needed reassurance that I didn't do anything wrong, that I wasn't truly violating her consent, that she was good with everything I did. I needed that reassurance that I didn't cross any lines. That when she was telling me no, it truly still meant yes. So I needed those reassurances. So I needed a bit of aftercare that would be different for me. I needed to have reassurance. So understand submissive aftercare, you're dominant, something like this. It's intense, it's emotional for them as well as for the submissive. So you may need to understand your dominant may need a bit of aftercare as well. Even if they traditionally do need aftercare, some dominants do need aftercare, and there's nothing wrong with saying that if you're dominant, by the way. So submissives, if you know your dominant needs aftercare, traditionally needs it, or sometimes needs it, and you do CNC, expect that your dominant, when you're ready and able, will need some aftercare from you. So when it's all said and done, and if things have gone well, it's time to when everyone is ready to start building that fantasy, start building that playbook for your next adventure in CNC play. But it's important to remember, please remember this. CNC play is always between consenting adults, and it is play. It is nothing more than play. It is um, in a way, it's acting. You are an actor playing a role. Um, it is never something that is going to cause any real or lasting harm. Everyone's limits are known, they are respected. Safe words are always used, safe gestures are always in use, and they're always respected. If you're submissive, safe words in the middle of your scene, play stops immediately and you find out what's going on and it is stopped. It is what it is. And yeah, you have to respect that. That is really, I think that is what people in the vanilla world, when they hear BDSMers talk about CNC play, is that they don't understand is that everything is happening between consenting people. What is happening that may seem absolutely abhorrent to them is happening with consent. It's been agreed to. Um, the participants are playing roles. They are not actually being themselves, even though they are being themselves by really tapping into perhaps their deepest, darkest fantasies. What is going on is still acting. Um, their limits are known and they're respected, and everybody is keeping things safer and using safe words and gestures. So it's very important to understand that. And finally, a side note when it comes to expressing fantasies and CNC things like that, there are people online who will write and share um, memes, gifs, stories about CNC play. Understand that these are stories and that these are fantasies. They are sharing something that is a fantasy, it's not a reality. Um, and it doesn't mean that the submissive actually wants some stranger to show up at their house, tie them up, throw them in the trunk of their car, and then take them to another place and make the kidnapped victim do things to them. They are things that are wanted to happen specifically in a relationship. And also, when you are going to express these things online, it is important to express them, if you so choose, in a manner that says, this is fantasy. This is not reality for me. This is a fantasy. because there are twat waffles out there who, if you do not make that distinction, will think that this is, for lack of a better word, real. And it leads to if it's done improperly, can lead people to assume that the lifestyle has some sort of rapey culture to it, which it doesn't, because we're doing this all with consent. And anytime you have somebody, and you will encounter them, unfortunately, that express these things, and consent is not part of the equation. What they are expressing is not BDSM, but it is assault. It is sexual assault. It is abuse. So understand that all of this happens without consent, and anytime there is no consent, this is not BDSM, but it is assault. And those people, um, there's a special place in hell for them. And they have no place in the lifestyle, in my opinion. And I hope you do agree with that opinion. So, on that note, um, I'm sorry, that wasn't a very positive way to end a podcast. Um, but it is. I would like you, if you have questions about CNC, please feel free to reach out. I will endeavor to answer them. I know this is a subject that can be hard for people to ask questions about because it is intimate. And it is also something that is, in the eyes of the vanilla world, forbidden, wrong, you name it. In the eyes of most vanillas, this subject matter is not something that is viewed positively. But I do want to create a safe space for anybody who has questions to please ask them, and I will answer them, so that we can have safe, honest discussions about this. And I look forward to your questions. And finally, no matter where you're listening, if you haven't already, please click the follow button so you never miss an episode. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on CNC Play, any questions you might have. And I hope you have and are having a fantastic Halloween. And I will chat with you next week when we will welcome in the month of November. So until then, have an awesome week.